So good morning, everyone. I'd now like to call to order this meeting of the Human Resources, Governance and Stakeholder Relations Committee of Waterfront Toronto. I've been advised that a quorum is present. It is appropriate to proceed. So firstly, I welcome all those who are joining our meeting today. We appreciate your interest and participation. I'd also like to remind you that the open session of today's meeting is being recorded and will be posted for the public to view. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our committee's newest member, Rahul Bardwaj. Rahul is currently President and CEO of the Institute of Corporate Directors and has a wealth of experience in so many different areas relevant to our mandate. Rahul, welcome to our committee. I would also like to ask that people keep their microphones and cameras off unless they wish to speak at the meeting. Thank you. And before we get into the business of the meeting, we thought it would be appropriate to commence with a land acknowledgement. Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that the land upon which we are undertaking our revitalization efforts is part of the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. In addition, Waterfront Toronto acknowledges that Toronto has historically been a gathering place for many Indigenous people, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples today. So we're now going to start with a motion to approve the meeting agenda. And can we have approval?
So moved.
Thank you, Joe. And can we have a seconder?
Happy to
second.
Oh, thank you. So that was Rahul?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so the first, so moved. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. The first agenda item of the business of the approval of the meeting agenda, and I'd like to bring attention to the committee that item 14 in the meeting book that was posted last week, which is an update of the MNP resource planning report, will now be discussed in open session, and it will be item 11 on the revised agenda. And I think what we will do is we will move, due to George's limited time this morning, I think we'll kick off the meeting with item number 6 on the agenda, which is the Waterfront Toronto Volunteer Corp report. So over to you, George.
Thank you, Wendy, and welcome to the 3 new board members, Leslie, Rahul, and Drew. And Wendy, again, thank you. Unfortunately, I have a funeral to attend, so I'm only going to be able to join for about 10 minutes. I did want to introduce this item. I did speak to Steve about this many months ago, but wanted to make sure that we got some other things done before I brought this forward to the board and to my team. When I joined Waterfront Toronto, one of the things that I became aware of is the great work we do, but very few people, and Cameron will speak to this later, actually know the role that Waterfront Toronto plays with regards to redevelopment and revitalization of the waterfront. In addition, I had people approaching me that have applied for jobs at Waterfront Toronto, unfortunately, because we are a small organization, we couldn't take everybody, but they wanted to find a way to participate. So early on, I thought, having a volunteer corps, whether we, call it Friends of the Waterfront or whatever we call it, where we could really try to achieve 3 objectives. One is to go beyond doing things for the community to actually doing things with the community. And I think, we've done a lot of great things in developing the waterfront community, but unless they're actively with us, I'm not sure they appreciate both the mandate we have and the role that they could play with us. The second part, I would say, is the opportunity to educate the people about our mandate. And I think when people are actively working with you, they better understand what you're actually about and what you're trying to achieve. The third thing is to really create opportunities for all people involved. I see that as a great way to bring some individuals into our kind of broader spectrum both with regards to our stakeholders and a broader group of stakeholders that we could engage with. But it's also a future pipeline for potential employees in the future. It could also help us, quite frankly, in the sense of helping the community, and in particular our high school students, with getting their volunteer hours. So I raised this with Steve some time ago. I bring it forward for your thoughts. I gave you a bit of a story. We joined a few weeks ago with the BIA to do a cleanup, both of graffiti and just garbage along the waterfront. And I just gave you an example where I, walked into the Sugar Beach area, and was cleaning up around the umbrellas and some of the people there. They asked who we were, why we were doing this. I raised the fact that we were working with the BIA to do this as a cleanup day, and that I was thinking of creating a volunteer corps. And one of the women right off the bat wanted to get our phone number and join, and another woman at another umbrella overheard and said she'd love to join too. So I think there's lots of potential interest. I think it really would elevate the knowledge base of our community with regards to our mandate, and it would allow us to directly give back to the community. So I just wanted to raise this. We are looking at the legal implications of creating such a group. I just want to make sure we haven't taken on any liabilities that we should be aware of, and that we can manage this. But I'm really excited. The people I've talked to, even some of the staff and even the people at the BIA, when we went out for lunch and I shared the idea, they're quite excited. So Wendy, I just turn it to you, and I will stay for a few more minutes, but I'd be happy to afterwards hear the thoughts of the board members on this idea. And thank you.
Thank you, George, and thank you for taking the time this morning to join us, because this is a very exciting and interesting initiative. Are there any questions from committee members or board members for George? Raul?
Thanks. Just a comment. I'm going to reinforce. I think this is a great idea. It's an excellent opportunity to engage the community, to learn more about the activities around Waterfront Toronto as well. And I recall in my days in the philanthropic world that United Way used to have a program called Days of Giving, which was an excellent way of engaging the corporate sector's way that's looking for ways to provide enhanced purpose for their employees and connect people with the world that they're living in. So if we can actually be an accelerator or a catalyst for that, and we're actually working towards our own ends as well, I think it's a fantastic idea. If I put my board hat on for a second, I say I think it's strategically aligned very well, but I am also wondering about the capacity and the organization around this. Something like this looks like it can point to great success, but what success means there's a lot of organization and resourcing that needs to go along with it to be done properly. So obviously volunteers need to be stewarded properly. So it shouldn't be something done off the corner of someone's desk, and that's a conversation we can have so we can ensure its success. It sounds like a great idea to start with.
Thank you, Raul. Very good points. Joe?
Just, and I'm going to echo some of what Raul just said here, just the strategic value and the next steps as the team looks to articulate and flesh this out further. On the strategic value, and this, it's interesting, it relates to item 7 on some of the public research, which was in Cam's research that the public is supportive of waterfront revitalization, but not familiar with Waterfront Toronto's role in it. And so to me, part of the strategic value here is further to define publicly our role with stakeholders and in the community. And then the other piece to me from a strategic value point of view is constituency building. We're going to have big discussions in the years ahead around the mandate of our organization and our role in the Portlands and so forth. So the stronger we have a constituency that knows us and we're defined by it, I think it puts us in better stead. So that's just the strategic value. I think to Raul's point, now the question of how you set this up to succeed is how you scope it. What is the expectations? How do we resource it? Doing something 1 or 2 times a year can be managed. Trying to pull together something that is an ongoing weekly, friends of group, much harder. And so how we scope this and set it up to succeed and resource it, I think is the task ahead, but well worth fleshing into that, I think.
Very good. Thank you, Joe. Jeannie?
Hi, everyone. I know I'm just visiting today, but just wanted to echo what Ruel and Joe said. This is amazing. It's a great initiative. I lived down on the waterfront for 15 years, so I know who's down there. And I think this initiative has the opportunity to reach out to a much more diverse group of people who actually live on the waterfront than we've typically seen engaged in the BIA and all the ratepayers groups and stuff. So I think that's wonderful. It's kind of a really easy way to like I said, to reach out to more people who live on the waterfront. Because sometimes the people who show up don't necessarily reflect the full diversity of who actually lives down there. So I find this very exciting.
Thank you, Jeannie, and we're very happy to have you here. So it's always great to have the other board members join today. And are there any other people who had their hand up?
I think there is another hand. I'm sure.
Is there one more hand? I just couldn't. No, I think it's down now.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much. And George, would you like to respond to any of the comments?
I think the comments were bang on, and we I'd make sure we're focused, to Joe, your point, trying to start with maybe a couple events, maybe a cleanup in the fall, quite frankly, before the winter, so that we get the garbage out of the way, and maybe one or two things a year, possibly also involving people, quite frankly, on the environmental side of some of our projects, because I know there's a lot of people that would love to contribute to, our wetlands projects and other things. So we will be limited in terms of focus, probably for two reasons. Strategically, it's the right thing to do. And as Ruel and others said, we want to resource this appropriately so that we succeed and train people appropriately. So I'm very excited. I appreciate the excitement that you share with us. And we will continue to keep you informed as we develop this. So thank you. And Wendy, I do apologize, but I will have to leave. But thank you for allowing me to introduce the item at least.
Understood. And thank you very much, George.
Thank you.
So we'll now move to item number 3 on the agenda, the declaration of the conflicts of interest. I now ask if there are any conflicts of interest to be declared. None declared. We can now move on to the business of the meeting. Thank you. And the consent agenda. And the first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the open session of the June 10th, 2021 meeting. May I please have a motion to approve the June 10th, 2021 open session meeting minutes? Is there a mover?
So moved. Sandra.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Seconded, it's Joe.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? Contrary minded? Thank you. We're now moving to the Human Resources report, and Rose, our VP of Human Resources, is now going to give us an update from her department.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning, everyone, again. Welcome. It's great to be in the office with my colleagues and see everyone. I'm going to take the report as read, but I would just like to highlight a few items and happy to take questions at the end. We're happy to say that after a long process, we finally have selected a consultant to help us with our DE&I program and our journey as we start down this path. M&P was awarded. We received 6 RFPs that were evaluated, and M&P was a selected proponent. We are going to be starting off with kickoff meeting in the very near future, and we can, again, as I said, start down this path. We've done a lot of great work around DE&I, and happy to update any of the newest board members. I did forward Raul a copy of our June board meeting, HR GSR meeting, and he's been updated on that. Leslie, I'm happy to do that as well if you would like a copy. We've done a lot of great work with the Mississaugas as far as our Portlands work. We've had staff do some training in the first tranche of the cultural safety training, Indigenous cultural safety training. All new staff coming on board and new board members will be offered that training as well as the DRP members. We are about to do the second tranche of that training, which is bystander to ally. And the next session is November 22nd. All board members will receive an invitation either from myself or Kaylee Richardson. And that is a 5-hour course to be taken over 8 weeks. So you've got a lot of time to take it. we made the first training session mandatory. We're not going to make this training session mandatory for board members, but you're welcome to take it. And, you know, we hope you do. There's a lot of great learning that will continue what we picked up on the first. It is mandatory for all staff, though. Let's just see what else is going on here. So at the town hall on June 28th, our staff town hall, we were lucky to have Matthew Hickey, who is our design review panel member and the first Indigenous design expert. Matthew attended and gave us his personal and professional lived experiences, which is great for all our staff to hear his insights and perspective. I also just want to update that we have gradually returned to our workplace. Myself, the senior management team, and Joint Health and Safety have worked collaboratively to put a return to the workplace plan in place. We're also following our government partners and other organizations. We are instituting a mandatory vaccine policy. So all staff and any guests to the office have to be double vaccinated in order to come in. I have to say that out of a small group, we've got some great response. And Mr. Cressy, you would be happy to know that out of less than 100 staff, we've only got 3. They're asking for exemptions. So we have a really good rate of double vaccinations. I'm really proud of our team for the responsibility they're taking. And under talent and succession management, M&P was awarded the resource and succession planning review as part of our audit. They've just finished the review. We've received preliminary findings, and Lisa will update in the open session later on that early findings and how we move forward. That's sort of the highlight, because I would have taken the report as read, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rose. And I think we do have a few questions here, starting with Leslie.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Rose. Mine is a very brief question. Regarding vaccination policy, so clearly you have a policy with regards to entering the facilities. Is it a policy, does it extend to an employment requirement, or is it simply, not simply, it's never simply, is it about being able to enter? So if someone's working from home primarily, can they still be, but not vaccinated, can they still be employed by the organization?
Great question. So right now, the policy is more a practice. We're actually putting the final policy together, but the practice is that if someone comes into the office, they have to be double vaccinated. Right now, we're all still working from home. The senior team has come into the office starting August 16th. And as I said, it was a gradual. I know that the province has sort of been more aggressive with their return to the workplace. We have decided the senior team was coming in 1 day a week from August to Monday. Starting Monday, we'll be coming in 2 days a week. We're expecting staff to come back 1 day a week. We are bringing people back in departments. So, for example, the development and communications departments in on Monday. We've scheduled it all through. So people can still be vaccinated working from home. And those that are not vaccinated, like I mentioned, those 3, we're going to look for some either accommodation exemption based on a medical or other respected ground, or we're going to figure out what the consequences are. Thankfully, we don't have to worry too much. So we're going to, again, I'm getting legal advice, external legal advice to help us with what the consequences might be. Did that answer your question, Leslie?
Yeah, sort of. I was just more anticipating, you know, there's always turnover, new people coming and leaving the organization. Will it say on the job description must be double vaccinated, or that's a different
Yes, in
issue?
the interview process, I apologize. When I'm negotiating salaries, I make it a condition of employment. They have to be double vaccinated in order to take the role.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And I think we have a question from Raul.
Great, thanks very much. And Rose, thanks very much for sending some of the material in advance. It was really helpful. I have 2 comments. I'll go first on the conversation that you were just having with Leslie. I just want to tap into the cultural impacts of this as well. So clearly there's going to be change over the next while in terms of the sort of the notional return to the workplace. And I'm gathering that somewhere in the background here, you'll be surveying staff to find out how this adjustment is working. So I'd be just curious to get a little bit of your sense of, you know, what that surveying is going to look like, and when you be in a position to sort of report back to the committee on how the workforce is adjusting to these new plans and what potentially the impact is on culture. And maybe I'll ask if you can answer that question. I'll come back to the second one in a second.
So we definitely, we did reach out to staff earlier, and everyone likes working from home. Everyone's delivering. However, to George's point, there are a variety of reasons why we're coming back to the workplace. We want to support our retail partners on the waterfront. We want to be able to help the businesses in the building. We want to come back to work so that there's synergy within teams instead of working independently. That is the premise that we're bringing staff back under, most likely. You're right, Raul. We haven't thought of what that sort of survey is going to look like with staff. I'll work with Cam's team, and we'll definitely think about perhaps, a month in, 2 months in, we'll figure out what people are feeling and how they're feeling. You're right. I mean, there's people that are just going to say, and I've heard that from colleagues in the network, we're working from home. It's all great. Why do we have to come back to the office? Well, you don't have to, but you do. If this is where you're employed, and we want to be an employer of choice, which is great. However, we have those synergies we want to work on as well. And I think Lisa might have some additions to my comments. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thanks, Rose, and good morning, everyone. I just wanted to make the comment that we actually have an opportunity with respect to our office lease coming up for renewal, where we're currently procuring a professional services from our real estate broker to help us determine our future workplace strategy, and that will definitely incorporate surveying all staff in terms of this time frame of how we're gradually returning to the workplace right now in the fall. That work in terms of the development of that workplace strategy and our future office space needs will incorporate a survey similar to what you just referred to, Rahul. So we have that opportunity.
Super. And, Rose, you made the point about almost having to make the case for staff to return to the workforce or to workplace. And that's a huge cultural shift. It'd be very interesting to follow that, and also to follow out some of the externalities as well. And I'm curious to know, how public transit and parking and things like that are impacting their perspective on returning to the workplace. So that'll be a TBD going forward, I think.
For sure.
Okay.
Sure. And you're right. There's that initial fear, and as I've been trying to, a lot of my job is employee relations. I mean, we're not union, so excuse anybody who's a union person, but I have to be there to support staff, and the fear is genuine. As I said to everybody, we are empathetic, we understand. Just try it. Try coming in. TTC is great right now. It's not as crowded. I'm a GO Transit commuter. It's been great. They've made a lot of strides. So try it out and see, and I'm here to help. And we've got EAP, we're supporting staff with EAP. There's people that are fearful, and so we're trying to do the best we can to support everyone.
Right, that's great. And the second question is somewhat more of a comment and a bit of a heads up. I had the benefit of having a wonderful conversation with our chair, our committee chair yesterday, and with Ian joined us as well, just to do a little bit of a pre-brief to some of these things. And I'd suggested at some point that it'd be helpful to work on doing some form of a dashboard around some of the really good material that you've brought forward. And I'm thinking particularly in the recruitment paragraph, there are a number of aspects of that lend themselves to doing a dashboard, providing some historical context and the sort. So just a heads up, I think that'd be something that if you're inclined to want to have a look at, that would be helpful for the committee as well going forward.
Noted. Thank you, Raul.
Great.
Very
Thank you,
good.
Chair.
Thank you, Raul. And it's exciting to have these kinds of conversations as we sort of kick off the school year, and we come back to work after COVID. So are there any other questions, any further questions or comments for Rose and the HR report?
Hey, hi, Wendy. Just a quick comment if I could. My only point would be give ourselves some flexibility. We had some great, really well thought through plans relative to post-Labor Day for return to office. And, with the Delta variant rising and its sort of, the vaccine's lack of efficacy associated with it, we've just sort of had to rethink it. We're surveying the landscape and seeing what Quebec has done. So my only point is, to the extent that we're communicating plans, we just might want to give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room relative to reacting to events as they unfold. So just more of a comment than anything. I'm sure that's been thought of. The best laid plans have to react to events, and I'm personally a little concerned about the fall and winter. And much as I push to get everyone back as soon as possible, it's sort of made clear to me that we have to look at the data and react accordingly. So just more of a comment.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think there was a bit of audio breakup there, but Rose, And the committee members, did you feel that you heard Andrew?
Andrew was really muffled, but the bit I did hear, I think you were concerned potentially with the numbers and the fall and how they're going to go. And if that is correct, obviously we're going to look at the plan to return to the workplace. And if the numbers go up and we have to scale back, George is prepared to do that. If that was your concern or your comment.
Need to be flexible.
Yeah, we definitely need to be flexible. You're right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So now we are moving to item number 7 on the agenda, the Stakeholder Relations Report. And I'd now like to invite Cameron, our VP of Strategic Communications and Engagement, to give us an update on the plan. Cameron?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. You'll have seen the cover sheet in a short presentation with some top-line results from a recent survey conducted by Forum Research just this past June and July. I should say, and I'm hopeful that William Shadden from Forum, who's Vice President, is joining us today. He should join us presently, and he will be here to correct any errors that I'm sure to make and can address any questions around the survey methodology. To level set for the new directors who are kind of joining this movie in progress, the corporation is at, I would call it, the early stages of establishing a standing online panel, kind of like a standing focus group, to help us refine and improve our public communications with the ultimate objective of sort of solidifying our reputation as the waterfront revitalization lead, and of course instilling confidence among the public that we're on the right track in revitalizing the shores of Toronto. So we're of the view that creating kind of a robust architecture of listening is really critically important as we enter this sort of second decade of our existence. And we're doing it so we don't wake up one day and find ourselves sort of stranded on high tide mark, feeling that, you know, our support, which traditionally there, has receded and we're sort of stuck, struggling to be relevant. So it's very much a proactive measure we're taking. And so what we have before us today is sort of a baseline. The first tranche of research is a baseline to track and evaluate opinion, and we can track it over time in future waves of research using our panel. But it gives us a benchmark on topics like, is revitalization on the right track? Have we delivered good value as a corporation? And more generally on our brand awareness, which we've already discussed this morning. If we could advance the slides, please, Charmaine. And the next one, please. And the next one. Thank you. So in June and early July, Forum used an online quantitative survey to interview 1,747 respondents. The sample was comprised both of Forum's panelists in the GTA, and they had to attest to having been to the waterfront the past 2 years or attested that they were planning on visiting in the next year. And additionally, and I would call this the informed group, we also reached out to all of our newsletter subscribers and that subscriber list, which is over 7,000. And they were invited to participate in the survey. So I mean, you're going to hear me talking about general population and kind of informed, for lack of a better term. When I talk about informed, it's the newsletter subscriber cohort. So this is, as I mentioned, a benchmarking study. If you go to the next slide, please. And this is the good news slide. And Joe mentioned this. The good news is that the public overwhelmingly supports our mandated objectives. We really looked at our corporate objects in our legislation, and we put them into, and we asked people about them. So Forum provided an overview of our mandate and asked respondents if they agreed with it. And the good news is an overwhelming majority, 90% of respondents indicated that they agree with Waterfront Toronto's mandate. Specifically, we asked, Waterfront Toronto's mandate is to enhance the economic, social, cultural value of waterfront lands and create an accessible and active waterfront for living, working, and recreation. It is to deliver these outcomes with a high degree of fiscal and environmental responsibility. How much do you agree or disagree with these objectives? So that was the question, and we were pleased with the results. And the next slide is the less good news, which is what we were discussing. And this isn't, I don't think, unique to Waterfront Toronto. It's that respondents weren't as likely to identify us as being responsible for the revitalization over the last couple of decades. When asked to select all of the organizations, so you didn't just have to select one, all the organizations they thought were responsible, 83% identified the City of Toronto as the lead, while only 65% identified Waterfront Toronto. And in fact, among the general population, only 1 in 3 are aware of Waterfront Toronto at all. So if we go to the next slide, and I'm back to a little more good news, is brand familiarity is very high with our informed respondents. And of course, there's no surprise to that. These are our newsletter subscribers. 9 in 10 of them are reporting that they're familiar with us, as you would expect they would be. And that's kind of our core constituency. But there's a clear correlation between awareness and support. The more familiar you are about us and what we do, the more likely you're to believe that we're delivering good value and that we're on the right track. And that's really the essence of the matter. There's a gap between this overwhelming support for our mandate, that 90%, and affirmation or certainty among the general population that we're on the right track. And that's the gap we need to close. That's the needle we need to move. And it's my personal view, and this needs to be empirically tested, that those who think that revitalization is on the wrong track, or who just aren't sure, hold dated views of a moribund waterfront where progress isn't being made. You know, the decades before where we weren't active in creating a new waterfront. Coverage of a languishing Ontario place may also play a role in this. I don't know, we have to test it. But this is why we need to create this online focus group panel that we can use and ping over time to test our language with people, especially young people, so that we can show them that momentum is underway on the waterfront. We can hear the mood of the public and craft our communications to respond to that mood. It can help us tear down the sort of barriers to entry by replacing technical language, which we're often too prone to use, with grassroots language, that we can reach out to connect with people who may not even think the waterfront is for them. And we can avoid using very cerebral language that fails to connect with the heart. It's the next slide, please. That's actually in site 4. But, and then I think maybe just advance the slide one more, please, Charmaine. Last slide. I think this is our last slide. So the next order of business is for Forum to build a profile of participants for this panel that's geographically, demographically, psychographically, and behaviorally representative. And then we need to decide on what we're going to be asking that panel in what sequence. And I have to discuss this with my colleagues, but this could range from asking respondents for reviews on our parts of our corporate reports, you know, our IIR or our rolling strategic plan, on our newsletter, or even to give us an appraisal of how we describe some of our projects on our website. So we're using commonplace language that isn't a barrier to access. Are we too top-down? Are we too doctrinal? Are we too unfamiliar? So all told, and I'll end it here, if we're to recruit this volunteer corps we just talked about, or grow our social media followership, or sign up more people for our newsletter, we've got to create sort of stepping stones along a path of commitment. And we need to allow people to take a step toward our mission and our purpose and become believers in revitalization efforts underway and steer clearly that we're on the right track. And the good news is, and I'll end with some good news, is that 35% of the general population respondents said, yeah, I'm interested now. I maybe didn't know about you, but I put up my hand and I want to be a part of your research going forward. And that in and of itself is going to grow our constituency. So we were really pleased with that number. I have all of the data and pleased to share it with the committee. It's a long report prepared by Forum, but I'm pleased to report. I didn't want to burden the committee with it now, but if people are interested in that as background or some weekend reading, by all means, I'll send it along. But with that, I will welcome. That, Madam Chair, is the summary of the report. I think you're muted.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Cameron. Very interesting, and I think that it would be helpful to post the report on Board Effect. And I think we have a question from Raul to start.
Great, just coming on here. Thank you. Really helpful. Here's a bit of a rookie question on this, and it has to do with prioritization of our stakeholders in all of this. And what I'm driving at here is it's a pretty good response rate. I'm not sure about the geographic dispersion of the respondents to all of this. And to put it another way, if you live in York Region or in Oakville, your experience of the waterfront is going to be very different from those who live along the waterfront. So really, we got different categories of stakeholders, and clearly we want everybody to be supportive of what we're doing. But do we focus our attention in one way or the other? Are we able to slice and dice the responses to that level of the geography and to really understand what that landscape looks like?
Will, you've got the data tables.
Yes.
I know the answer is yes, but
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, we are tracking the geographic location of respondents, and we did kind of stratify our fieldwork approach to ensure that we had kind of different representation of different areas within the GTA that might use the waterfront in different ways, as you mentioned, Rose. So yeah, you're on point. There are some geographic differences and nuances present in the data, and we are able to track that, and we'll be able to kind of trend that over time as well.
That'll be helpful to see how that develops, and if there's some narratives that are developing that need to be reconciled. That'll be really important to know. Thanks.
Thank you. And we have a question from Leslie.
Thanks. It's sort of a follow-on from Raul's question. I'm just trying to understand the demographic composition of the respondents to the survey. Age, I don't know that the survey requires self-identification of ethnicity or any dimensions on that to have an understanding of whether or not. I'm just trying to understand. I mean, it's a large number and quantity, but trying to figure out if they're all age 60 to 70, it's a different thing than if they're all age 20 to 30. So I'm just trying to understand if I'm assuming, I'm not sure, I'm asking if that data dimensions are available in your survey.
Yeah, great question, Leslie, and I can understand how you want to know the answers to that. So absolutely, we have a full demographic profile in our data. So Cameron mentioned that we have a fairly comprehensive report. So that detailed information is available in that report. And one of the next steps that Cameron went over is continuing to kind of expand the profiling kind of characteristics of the panel that we're developing here, as you can see on this slide. So we'll be able to continue to layer on more demographic data as we keep kind of engaging with these respondents, because everything will be tracked over time. But yeah, we have all of your traditional demographics, geography, age, income, education levels, gender, ethnicity. Yeah, so full kind of profile.
Thank you. And the reason I asked the question is because I think the response on how the tactics on responding to the survey will vary by the composition of who we're targeting and to Raul's point, who you're prioritizing, because your channels of communication will need to be more variable depending on the composition of the respondents, and where you see a low I'll use satisfaction or low ratings, and you want to bring those up versus those that are still fairly healthy. So I think that's a layer in terms of thinking about how you use this information to the ultimate goal for the organization. Thank you.
And may I just add, Leslie, and it's important, our informed newsletter subscriber and the general population, the profile of those two are almost at perfect variance with each other. Whereas the informed or the newsletter subscriber skew male, general population female, general population younger, informed 55 plus. You know, you can tell that we're kind of talking to ourselves, you know, higher income, home ownership of the informed, more likely to be white, more likely to earn more than $200,000. So it's really a gap. There's a chasm there between those
well,
populations.
and you know, I spent a lot of time on the waterfront this long weekend, and what you're describing is not who was out there on the waterfront, just from a glance. So that's not a very scientific anything. It's very different, and it's young families. So I just think that in order to really utilize this kind of data, we need to really, because otherwise we'll be putting energy and effort, not necessarily in the most well sort of triaged way, and we have limited resources. So
very good, thank you. And we also have a question from Jeannie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for sharing the survey results. I actually echo Raul and Leslie. I had the exact same questions. I wanted to understand the demographic details. age, ethnicity, location of where these people live. Are they immigrants, non-immigrants, income? But it sounds like that's all available in the detailed report. So I look forward to seeing that. The other question I have, Cameron, is like, what's our desired outcome out of this? I mean, apart from we want to kind of get to know who, you know, knows about us, like, is it, for example, if we see, I suspect in our data that we have no respondents from Rexdale and Malvern, is our goal that we want to make sure that Waterfront Toronto is known in these more peripheral areas? Or is our goal that we want to make sure that with our core stakeholders who are affluent, perhaps more social media connected, we want to make sure that, you know, they're on our side and continuing to, you know, be good influencers and to say great things about us, you know, or do we want to actually learn like what's missing, like what are we not doing by trying to engage with people who are not necessarily, you know, that we're talking to. I don't know. I mean, the whole sense that we're kind of talking to kind of amongst ourselves, you know, I agree with my fellow board colleagues' comments about that. So just curious, like what is our desired outcome out of all of this?
Well, I think it's all of those things, but in particular, moving that dial on, are we on the right track? I want people to think the waterfront is an area is for them. It is not an enclave. It is ultimately a place of national consequence. I mean, I often refer back. This is a place that had a royal commission. It's a place of importance. We are proposing to build places, cultural places that are of national consequence. But the key sort of metric, I think, is closing that gap between support for our mandate and on the right track, so that people understand, yeah, I get it. This place is actually on the right track. I think that they're doing the right thing. We're less concerned, I think, with building our brand recognition as a corporation. I think that people feel supportive that the revitalization effort is there's momentum behind it. Great about that. Also, I do want people to feel that this is a place that they're welcome and that there's something in it for them. And I think we do have to reach out beyond the precinct and the DWA to do that. So it's kind of all of those things. But I would love, I mean, the real outcome would be, you know, if I could have everyone in the world as a newsletter subscriber, I would be really happy, you know, because that seems to be this correlation between support and understanding for us. And they take that small commitment, and then maybe they become a volunteer next, you know, and then maybe they become something else. So it's those commitment steps that I'd like to migrate people along.
Well, we should be also mindful, though, that a lot of the people who probably use the waterfront or use our public spaces perhaps don't have digital connectivity, don't subscribe to newsletters, don't have time. So, you know, I'm really curious as an organization, like I said, going out to the Rexdales and Malverns and the Jane and Finch areas to see perhaps those are people who actually do use our waterfront more. I don't know. And how do we engage them? And is that a priority for our organization? Anyway, thanks for your response.
Thank you very much. So I think we may have the opportunity, Cameron, to do another brief on this piece, because there's a lot of information and I think a lot of questions that we have. So thank you very much. So I think we will now move to item number 8 on the agenda, which is the meeting schedule for committees and board. And so each year in September, we provide a meeting schedule to each of our directors, setting out a proposed set of meeting dates for each committee and the board. The schedule for 2022 has been prepared by management, consistent with past years, and has been reviewed by the board chair and each committee chair. So I'd now like to ask Ian Ness to speak to the materials.
Thank you very much. Charmaine, can I just ask you to turn to the next page? Just very briefly, because I think Wendy just said basically everything that needs to be said. This is done on an annual basis. This is for information only. It goes to the board in October for their review. But what we've set out on this are the statutory public holidays, as well as other holidays and events that that we were noting. And it's got the schedule through to the end of 2022 for each committee meeting and board meeting. We've put in, it's more than a placeholder, but identification of topics to be considered at those meetings, but those are certainly not set in stone. And we'll talk in the next item about the work plan for this committee. But it's there for information. I don't think I need to say anything more, but I'm happy to answer any questions or deal with any comments.
Thank you, Ian. Any questions or comments from the committee? Okay, so we'll move to item number, sorry.
Sorry, Wendy, sorry, it's Jeannie here. I just had one comment about the CEO mandate. I'm wondering if maybe this will happen in future, but if we need to add a line item, on the whole philanthropy side in terms of the role of the CEO and managing those types of outreach or relationships. I know we have a fundraising department, but that was just a note that came to mind while I was reading this.
That's under item 10 for the governance review. Is that the documentation? Is that what you're speaking to?
Oh, is that the next item? Sorry, I was just speaking to the mandate of the president and CEO.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, is that the next one? Sorry.
So maybe what we can do is I'm happy to address that comment, but maybe we can just set that aside until we're talking about the overall governance documents themselves. That's okay.
Thank you, Ian and Jeannie. So can we move on to the work plan for the committee, or are there any other questions for this about the schedule? Okay, so as committee members know, it's not only good practice, but also part of our mandate to establish each year a work plan for the committee. And your materials contain the work plan, so I'd ask Ian to speak to this as well.
Thank you very much. So the first page, actually, Charmaine, can you just go to the next page? So the first page here is the same schedule, always the same listing of statutory holidays and other events, as you saw for the committee and board schedule. And the next page, we've actually got a more detailed work plan for the committee for the next 12 months. What we tried to do was track through the mandate that was approved by the board in March, and that's actually in the materials. You don't need to switch to it right now, Charmaine, but it's in the materials for you to review. And so what we've done is each meeting of the committee, we will receive the HR report and the stakeholder relations report. And Rahul, your comments about dashboards and helpful sort of information in our presentation were noted. And then what we've tried to do is make sure that throughout the course of the year, we address the other matters that form part of the committee mandate, whether it's governance review, whether it's HR compensation, board effectiveness, and as I say, HR and stakeholder relations, we think are important enough, or at least worthy enough to give you the quarterly update. These are not set in stone by any stretch of the imagination. There will be items that I'm sure come up that will require our attention throughout the year, but it gives us a reference point to both plan and, frankly, to review and evaluate at the end of the year as to how we did and as we measure our effectiveness as a committee and as a board. I'm happy to take any questions and or any comments that anybody has.
Rahul?
Sure, thank you, Madam Chair. Ian, just maybe we take this offline as well, but just as I'm reading through the work plan, looks great. I mean, it's a great start, good framework. There are two items that come up in my mind that I'm not sure where they fall into this. One on the HR side and the goal setting. So presumably the CEO goals will come to the board at some point, but presumably they'll come through this committee as well. And I know there's a performance and compensation report in June, and my guess is that would be preceded at the beginning of the year with a conversation around goals for the year and for the senior management team. Am I right there?
You know what? I'm gonna ask Rose to answer that from the HR perspective in terms of the actual specifics that we follow through. Rose?
Thank you. Sure, Rahul. So you're absolutely right. The goal setting, which we call our performance planning for success, or PFS, George finishes that task with Steve. They're actually in the process right now of finishing that goal setting up. Historically, It has not come to any committee members or the board prior to. It does come through the HRGSR committee at year end for final review. Typically, the chair will come to the HRGSR committee, present his or hers review recommendations for the CEO. It's then accepted by this committee and brought to the board in June for obviously discussion and review. And then there is agreement on the rating, any salary change, and variable comp pieces.
Okay, so do I hear from that then that the goal setting for the next fiscal year comes in with the performance and compensation discussion for the current fiscal year? Is that the idea?
In a perfect world, it would work that way. It hasn't the last little while, I'll be honest with you. In the last 20 years, we've tried to get it going, and for the most part it was. Timing the last couple of months hasn't worked out for that to happen this past June. That's why the board did not see the 21-22 goal setting for George. But you know, if it's something that the board wants to look at, absolutely, I can let George know and we can share it with the whole board.
You know, frankly, I think, you know, it's a question to have with Steve and George about the whole board,
Sure.
but I think to the extent that we're doing performance and compensation in June, you know, I think it's to you know, the management's help, in fact, to have us a part of the goal setting at the very beginning so there are no surprises. So if I can ask you to take that offline, and you'll figure out what makes sense in terms of your own reporting and data capture and your own planning, but it would be helpful to see that earlier in the year. So maybe
Okay.
we'll take that offline.
Sure.
The second one, then, on a slightly different one, back to Ian, is around the nominations process. So I know that, you know, given the nature of what we do, but I don't see nominations in the work plan. But am I gathering that this committee at some point is going to have a conversation around what the board matrix is and start to look at the terms and how they're lining up and where the gaps may be, and you know, have a conversation with our chair, both committee chair and board chair around that?
It's certainly open for discussion. I mean, as you know, the nominations are not something that we have control over. Each level of government coordinates their own nomination process as the positions become available. We do share through our government relations director and through the board chair our views of, you know, missing skill sets. We've developed internally a board matrix, and that's something that certainly we can deal with and look to share with this committee the details. As I say, typically each level of government has their own particular way to deal with it, and it doesn't necessarily track exactly, shall we say, what we as an organization may want or need, but that information certainly gets shared.
So how's this? I've been to this rodeo a couple of times, Ian, so I know exactly where you're going. But perhaps around the board effectiveness, if I'm looking at that, you know, maybe there's an opportunity for us when we look at board effectiveness and do a year-end evaluation, is a good time to look at the board matrix to see if it reflects, you know, the strategy of the organization. And so the type of advice that we can give our shareholders is to say that, you know, this is where we think our strategic gaps or support would be helped. So, you know, if we suddenly go heavily digital, you know, do we need cyber capability or digital capability on the board? It helps our shareholders to know what to look for. I understand there's a whole political process in there. I mean, this is, you know, we all had to go through something to get here as well. But I think it's a part of our duty, in fact, to do an evaluation of what our matrix is all about. Does it reflect the strategy, and how do we communicate that with into the nominations process? So it'd be nice to see it on the work plan.
Yep. Okay.
Super.
Noted. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Raul. And I think that's a terrific recommendation. So now I think we'll move to, if there's no further questions, I think we will move to have a motion to approve the proposed work plan with revisions. Or Ian, would you prefer to bring it back with revisions?
I would, since this committee doesn't meet again until November, I prefer to have it approved with the amendments as noted, if that's acceptable to the committee.
I'm happy to move it.
Thank you, Raul. And a seconder?
Happy to second it, and thanks for Raul's revisions there.
Thank you, Joe. Any discussion? All in favor? Contrary minded? So moved. Okay, so now we're moving to item number 10, the governance documentation review. And as you know, this has been a long road, and Ian has done a terrific job, but we're now in a position to introduce for discussion and approval the final set of governance documents. And a lot of people have put in a great deal of work to get us to this point. And in the future, I think we'll be considering any necessary changes on an annual basis, and not having this long time gap between the revisions. But I'd now like to ask Ian Ness to speak to us about the governance documents.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The materials are in your book. You'll see there's a cover note as well as the materials. Just very briefly, for the benefit of those who haven't been with us, this is a process that we started 2 years ago. In part, it comes out of recommendations from our internal auditor, MNP, in part just from good corporate practice. There was documentation that hadn't been reviewed in some cases for years, in some cases they didn't exist. And so we undertook a fairly extensive review. We looked at some of the similar Situate organizations as to their governance documents. We met with our senior management team. We spoke to each of the committee chairs, and then we reviewed it internally again, and then external legal counsel, Barry Ryder or Bennett Jones. You may recall he was at a prior board and committee meeting. There was a total of 14 documents we identified for review. Many of those were approved by the board previously, some in December a year ago, some last March. The documents for consideration at this meeting would be bylaw number 1, which is the general bylaw, bylaw number 2, which is our open meeting bylaw, public access, bylaw number 3, which is a new document that replaces a resolution. This is board remuneration. I'm going to just touch briefly on each of these documents, but I'm just highlighting them now. The mandate of the board, the mandate of the board chair, and the mandate of the CEO. The wrongdoing policy, and then we've also put before the committee and we put before the board in October a slight revision of the farm committee. There was comments that were made leading up to the March board meeting for the 3 committee mandates, and frankly, we made the change on the other 2 mandates, but we missed it on the farm, so it's just a slight change. Reference ESG. Speaking to the documents briefly, the general bylaw is substantially the same. It's been, in substance, it's been cleaned up and reflects, I'll say, current practices. And Barry Ryder and his team have been very helpful in terms of putting those together. The open meeting bylaw, there's really only one area of change, and that's in 6.1. Sorry, Charmaine, I'm speaking faster than you're able to move. I apologize. 6.1. The change relates to, we found ourselves in a situation where we were posting documents for the public to see before the board had even had a chance to consider them, things like reports and strategies, et cetera. So what we've said is that those matters can be, that have not yet been approved by the board, can be considered in a closed session. Obviously, when they are passed, such as the annual report or the strategic review, they become public documents. And we do have an opinion that that these changes are consistent with the wording of our governing legislation. Board remuneration, which is bylaw number 3. This is the same as our existing remuneration policy. And I note that this is something that this committee should be reviewing or could be reviewing on an annual basis. But it's the same with one exception, and that's that we realized that there was a number of committee meetings that we were requesting people attend, but the policy said that only members of the committee got paid, so we thought that was unfair. So we're saying that for committee meetings, if we're requesting you attend, you get paid even if you're not a committee member. The mandate of the board, chair, and the mandate of the CEO have been revised substantially to reflect current practice. And in the case of the CEO's mandate, to reflect the terms upon which we went public and we hired a CEO, in this case George, 2 years ago. And so that's been noted. And Wendy, or sorry, Jeannie, this is where we can circle back on your comment from a few minutes ago. The wrongdoing policy is in substance the same, provides a mechanism by which people are required actually to bring to the attention of the corporation either to management or to our accountability officer any evidence or concern about wrongdoing, and there's a process for our accountability officer, who's independent of the corporation, to make such investigations as are appropriate. And then I say for the farm committee, we just made one minor change to reflect that they have to consider factors relating to ESG, and that's a conforming change that we should have picked up from the other last March, because we made it to the other committee mandates. That's a fairly high level view, and I appreciate that. I'm happy to answer any questions, deal with any concerns, and certainly Jeannie will circle back on your comment.
Thank you, Ian. So Jeannie, we'll start with you and then we'll move to Raul. Do you have a question? Go ahead with Jeannie.
I'm sorry, should I share my comment again?
Yes, please.
Now that we're at the proper place. Sorry
yes.
about that earlier
comment.
No, I just had a comment regarding the mandate of the president and CEO of the organization, just knowing what our organization is doing regarding philanthropy efforts in the upcoming years. Just wondering if we need to add another line item to the responsibilities, specifying some sort of responsibility regarding a relationship with potential donors, or not sure kind of how to word that, but wondering if we do need to add that in, because there probably will be a significant time commitment required on behalf of the president and CEO as part of the whole fundraising process.
And Ian, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I apologize. As Jeannie was talking, I was reading the listing of responsibilities. I'm happy to. I mean, I see that. Like
line item 8 and 9 could maybe cover it off, or number 8. But anyway, just something I'm going to throw out there for consideration.
Yep. Yeah, and I even noticed 3, developing, and maintaining critical linkages, effective working relationships with stakeholders, private sector stakeholders, community groups, general public as well. So George isn't on the line. Steve's not on the line. I shouldn't speak for either one of them, but I think that's. I mean, the philanthropy initiatives go through farm and make their way up that way to the board generally. I don't think there would be any concern about adding words. I must admit, I'm not exactly sure what words to use, but I've noted your comment.
Yeah, I was pre-reading the massive farm deck for our farm meeting on Tuesday, and the philanthropy team, Ian, is presenting their thoughts, and there was language in there about, the necessity of senior management to be part of the whole process. Yep. So that's where I kind of made that linkage.
So I'm happy to take it back, and maybe what I can do is between now and the board meeting in October, which is where these documents actually get approved, suggest the specific language to deal with that, if that's okay. I mean, I certainly hear what you're saying. I just would just want to think about the exact specifics, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've seen the farm material, and I noted that that comment, and and good for you for reviewing it already.
There's a lot to read. Got to start early.
And so I'm happy to take that back and suggest some wording that would be incorporated before it gets presented to the board in October.
Okay, thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Jeannie. Any other questions for Ian?
Madam Chair, it's Rahul. Just one couple questions here.
Very good. Thank you,
if I can.
Yes,
first of all, congratulations. This is really big, heavy lifting. These things hang together really well. So, and they're also evergreen documents, right? We learn over time what really works and what doesn't. So there's chances to refine them in the real world, which is good. The comment is around the wrongdoing policy, which on my first read of it, it's a really robust whistleblower policy that creates a positive obligation, which is a little unusual. And Ian, you sort of touched on it a little bit. So kind of a little bit of built-in question there is this positive obligation. Do officers, employees, and especially contractors know about this positive obligation? And has anybody gone down the rabbit hole of figuring out what happens if somebody doesn't fulfill their responsibility under here to actually report something? So that's just sort of a question I'll put out there and give you a chance to think about that. The second question is more around a process piece, and that's the accountability officer. Do we get a certificate from the accountability officer on a quarterly basis, either to the committee or to the board, indicating whether or not there've actually been any wrongdoings that they've been notified about or not?
Let me answer the second question first, and that's that on an annual basis, I probably can't call it a certificate, but we get confirmation from the accountability officer as to whether there have been any inquiries, and in general sense how they disposed of them, i.e. if it requires further investigation, typically we'll hear about it. If they've dismissed it on their own, then, or at least determined that it's not appropriate to make any further investigation, then they'll simply just make a general statement such as, you know, there was two matters that came to my attention and I determined they were not appropriate to consider further. But we get that on an annual basis.
And does that come up with the audit? Is that a part of the whole audit, or is that completely outside of it?
You mean the financial audit? I don't. I would say no, but Lisa's on the line that can confirm that. But I don't believe that's part of the audit review.
To answer that question, the external auditors BDO asked management specifically, and have George and I sign as part of their representation letter that we're not aware of any fraud or error in the organization. So if anything came up through the accountability officer, we would find out about that and be able to answer. And in addition, the farm committee, the auditors also ask the farm committee members as well that same question. So they do consider it, but they don't have a direct relationship to the accountability officer. I don't believe.
Then what is the mechanism or the timing for the accountability officer to report to the board on whether there anything comes up under the wrongdoing policy?
Ian, do you know the answer to that? I would think it would come up on an as required basis in terms of if anything came up. Go ahead.
Yes. So to the extent there's matters that require further investigation, that comes back to senior management and gets reported into the board as appropriate, i.e. if it's something that needs to be considered. There's a mechanism certainly for notifying the board chair. There is not a, like as I say, we don't get an annual certificate, so that there's no flow of information, but we can certainly add that. I mean, it's not it's just it hasn't been the practice, but in terms of sort of a certificate or anything like that like a negative certificate that flows to the board, it's more as if anything comes to the board's attention or to the corporation's attention, that flows up to the board. And the board
sure. Okay. So Ian, maybe we can take it offline a little bit, but I think it'll be handy. It's pretty standard that I've seen in whistleblower situations where there's a quarterly certificate either attested by the CEO or somebody saying there's been nothing raised under whistleblower. Because I'm with you so far. It's just on an annual basis. If there are things that have happened that are not reported in the ordinary course. We don't know about it until 6 or 9 months after. I'm not sure that that's ideal. So there's a way to kind of get this done where the integrity of the process is respected, but the board is notified of whether there are any claims. Now, we don't need to know the specific substance because that's protected within the policy itself, but just knowing that there's an ongoing process. So maybe we can think about the right way to do that.
Sure, happy to get the benefit of your experience on that one, absolutely. And I'm sorry, Rahul, you had a first question, and can you just refresh my memory?
Sure. Just on the positive obligation under this policy, just curious to know, it includes contractors and others. Do they know they have a positive obligation? And the rabbit hole question, has anybody considered what happens if somebody doesn't fulfill that?
Generally speaking, this is each contractor is required to sign up to the code of conduct, which would include language similar to this. It's part of the standard documentation that the contractors are required to execute with Waterfront Toronto. Have we had a situation where things don't get reported? I mean, I'm not aware of any, and so I guess to answer your question, no, we haven't made our way down that rabbit hole.
Good. We'll find out in due course, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Rahul. Any further questions for Ian on the governance documentation? Or the wrongdoing policy, sorry. Any further questions at all for Ian? Okay, so we will move to item number 11 on the agenda. Sorry,
Wendy,
Ian?
Yeah, can I think it is appropriate, if it's okay with you, that we have the resolution and maybe a formal resolution. Maybe Charmaine, you can just go back to the cover page. Bottom, there's a form of resolution. I think it was on page 40. There it is. If you can just, sorry. It says, upon motion duly made, second and carried, be it resolved, the committee recommend for approval by the board the listed governance documents of the corporation, each in the form presented to the meeting with such changes thereto as the board may approve. I would just say each is presented to the meeting subject to the comments made at the meeting with such changes thereto as the board may approve.
Very good. And so maybe I please have a motion to approve the governance documentations.
I'm happy to approve.
Thank you. And a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Andrew. Any discussion? All in favor? Contrary minded? So moved. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't have that approval linked in here. So, okay, so now we're moving to item number 11, the update on the MNP resource planning report. And as board members may recall, we've now engaged MNP to provide us with a report on resource planning for the organization. And I'd now like to ask Lisa Taylor to provide us with an update. Lisa?
Thank you, Wendy, and good morning, everyone. So the resource and succession planning review being undertaken by MNP is actually part of our 3-year internal audit plan. It was identified as a priority area when the Farm Committee approved that internal audit plan a year or so ago. And it's really selected to focus on ensuring we have the operational resilience and capacity to deliver on our strategic plan. And it's focused on the 3 areas outlined there: resource and succession planning, retention and employee engagement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this report is an update on the process of where we're at. While, as Rose mentioned, MNP have substantially completed this review, the report is still being finalized and is to be shared with management, reviewed, etc. So we're not in a position to actually share the report today. But what we wanted to do was just share some of the progress done to date and some of the highlights of the report in terms of the strength areas. So in terms of the progress to date, MNP has done quite a significant amount of work as part of this review. They've held a workshop with the senior management team to brainstorm and understand some of the challenges that the organization is facing with respect to resourcing and succession planning. They've also had interviews with key members of the senior management team and other staff to gather information related to the scope areas. They've looked at a lot of documentation, including this committee's materials over the last few years, as well as our strategic plan and other things. They've also done a comprehensive skills and capabilities inventory survey. And what that really focused on, it's about the purpose is really to identify potential skill gaps that we might have in the organization based on delivering on our strategic plan. And it looked at collecting employee proficiency levels for over 70 key and emerging skill areas. And we had a 98% completion rate on that survey. So that is going to give some really great insights in terms of the strengths that we have in the organization as well as potential gaps. And in terms of some preliminary results of the review, MMP have identified 6 strength areas with respect to HR and resource and succession planning. That being communication, around communication during the pandemic and the work from home situation in terms of the various town halls and CEO emails throughout the last year and a half. They saw the fact that we have 36 HR foundational guidelines as another strength. They highlighted the focus on mental health over the last 18 months that the corporation has made in terms of augmenting some of our health benefits for all staff, as well as the session that we had with staff to help with tools and techniques to manage mental health challenges. They also highlighted that there was a real high level of attraction in terms of when we do have open positions at Waterfront Toronto, there's a high volume of applicants, and which allow most of the roles to be filled. They also highlighted executive commitment as being a strength, and that fact that it's really shared amongst the leadership team to ensure that we have strong resource succession planning strategies. And then finally, unanimously as well, in terms of all the work that they are doing, they highlighted the HR dedication. So Rose DeRoche and her team were really recognized by the organization, across the organization, for being dedicated and very hardworking. So that just gives a little bit of insight in terms of the strengths so far that MMP have highlighted. As I mentioned, we hope to come back, or we will come back in November with the report and the recommendations. So happy to answer any questions at this time. And this report will also go to the Farm Committee as well as part of the internal audit plan work. Thank you, Lisa.
Looks like we have a question from Leslie.
Thank you very much. My question is kind of focused on it's great to see the areas of investment, I'll call it, in the talent and resources for the organization. I think it's terrific. My question is on the DEI dimension, and I guess it to a certain degree dominoes into the other two. How are we sort of understanding the depth to which this investment and these outcomes, the list that MMP identified, is translating into the work itself? So there's the capabilities of the staff, but then by inference, part of why we would do all of this is that the ultimate impact of the projects that we're delivering have a different, I call it, sensibility or attention to social impact or social capital, in addition to the traditional on budget, on time dimensions of a project. Is there a way that we're capturing or thinking about, because it looks like it's still early days, that how to measure, and I use this term loosely because I recognize this is a difficult thing to measure, that the investment in DEI is translating not only to the environment in the workplace, but what's happening in our projects and the attitude. So this is a big, and maybe this is not the place to discuss this, but I think I'm curious to understand how DEI is getting beyond the tactics of a checkbox and actually translating into how projects are delivered, how we work, how we procure, how we interface with the community. The interface with the community is the more obvious way, but I actually think whether we talk about, I don't know, supply chain diversity or any of those issues, part of why we invest at this end of the cycle is to move to make all our public dollars work harder. So it's a very big question. I don't expect a full answer, but it's on my mind as we're going through this. There's lots of attention being paid to this, and I'm just trying to translate it and how we're tracking the impact of all the efforts.
And that's an awesome question. And this report will not result in how we're tracking the impact of these investments. This report is really about making sure that DE&I, that lens is thought of and in terms of this HR review. At the bigger picture level, Leslie, in terms of your question, the overall strategy, which is a separate piece of work that MMP just won under competitive procurement for DE&I, that piece of strategy is like multi-dimensional in terms of all the areas that you looked at in terms of our supply chain, in terms of our fundraising, making sure that we're reaching out and that we have a DE&I lens on all of that. And part of that is how tracking the impact of our investments and how we do that. So that work is to come, and as Rose mentioned earlier in her report. So we're hopeful that sometime early next year we'll have that strategy, how we're going to be tracking the impact, and we'll be able to have a much more thoughtful and fruitful discussion about it at that time.
Thank you. Appreciate that, because I think this is an important investment in leadership, and we want to see it translate into the outcomes we want. Perfect.
Absolutely.
I look forward to that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you, Leslie and Lisa. Any further questions for Lisa regarding the MNP report? Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. I now will move to item number 12 on the agenda, which is a motion to go into closed session. May I now please have a motion to go into closed session to discuss items number 13 and 14 of today's agenda?
So moved. So moved.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I also want to remind everyone that any resolution considered in the closed session needs to be passed when the meeting returns to open session. So we'll now be going into the closed session agenda. Having concluded our discussion of the closed session items, I now ask for a motion to move back into the open session. Is there a mover and a seconder of the motion to move back into the open session? Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. So approved. So the recording of the session is to be turned back on. We're now in the public session. And we will address item number 17, the resolutions arising from the closed session, if any. And we now have returned to the open session and resumed the recording of the session. May I please have a motion to approve the June 10th, 2021 committee meeting closed session minutes? Is there a mover and a seconder?
Wendy, it's Rahul. I'm unable to do either because I wasn't present at that time.
Okay,
yeah,
I'll
move again.
Thank you, Andrew. And I will second. Any discussion? All in favor? Contrary minded? So moved. Okay, so we made it, even with the fulsome discussion. So we're now moving into the motion to terminate the meeting. So having concluded the business of the meeting, I ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Is there a mover and seconder?
Happy to move it.
Thank you, Andrew.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Rahul. I now declare the meeting terminated. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation and very dynamic discussion. And I hope you each remain healthy and safe. And thank you for the board members that joined us as well.